my name is Darrin Horbal. I've been with Firefly since March of 2003. It's about 20 years. I am an artist on DE, and I've worked with Eric and Simon even before that. We worked together at Impressions. That was back in 1995.
Hi, my name's Niall Benzie. I'm the lead artist on Stronghold Definitive Edition. I've worked at Firefly for roughly 18 years, first starting as QA just after Stronghold 2 was released, and eventually becoming a full 3D artist several years ago.
Stronghold DE is going back in time and taking basically the foundational game of Firefly. It was very well received when it came out, and to this day, people love it. So being able to go back to it and, updating it in some ways, but still keeping the original feel in other ways, that I think is what we're really all shooting for.
Stronghold Definitive Edition is a remastering of the classic Stronghold game with the same core gameplay with modern quality of life improvements. From a graphical perspective, we're not trying to reinvent the style. The goal was really to more clearly bring into focus the original art with some refinement and improvements, essentially a new lick of paint over the original assets. I think with respect to being faithful to the original art style, it helped massively to have starting points, but we were definitely looking to improve and enhance where we could, but always trying to remain faithful to the original style, not reinvent. We were quite lucky in the fact that around 60 to 70% of the original art was still usable as at least a starting point. The remaining assets ultimately were either missing or unusable due to plugins which are no longer compatible. Of the original assets that were missing, the main aspects were the trees, most of the environment, some buildings, and I believe 2 of the characters. So they all that had to be remade from scratch.
When they were done originally, first they were done very quickly. There were also, I can find the shortcuts that were taken, which makes sense because the shortcuts, you would never see them at the smaller scale. So when you blow them up, it becomes very obvious you just can't use it as is. Most of the problems or the challenges we had were having to deal with the old software again and having the fact that a lot of the scripts weren't available.
In terms of what software we decided to use, I was ultimately in charge, which was a big responsibility, being my first project as a lead artist. All the original assets were created in 3ds Max, and as a studio generally, we're moving on to Blender for most of our projects, so I decided that all assets I was working on, I would move to Blender. So all the buildings, the environment, and even the UI was created in Blender. All the characters remained in 3ds Max because we had the original animations, and bringing them across to Blender proved quite difficult. So all assets apart from characters moved to Blender, and all the characters remained in 3ds Max.
Now, we had a way of bringing back the original animations that we had as well. So we would use that as a starting point, but there were a lot of animations that we enhanced. First, fixing some things that just didn't look good originally that, again, you could get away with then, but you can't get away with now. But also, like the walk animations were all 16-frame animations. Now they're all 32-frame animations. A good example would be the Fletcher. People who played Stronghold might remember that the Fletcher has this very iconic limp. So even though I was enhancing the animations and giving it more frames, I really wanted to make sure that we didn't lose. Like if all of a sudden they're starting to play the game and the Fletcher isn't limping as he's carrying the bow or something like that, people be like, wait, what happened? So I wanted to make sure that, yes, that's I think a key example of something where we did make it better but did not change it at its fundamental level.
The thing I'm most excited for players to see is probably the new Fire. The original Fire consisted of roughly 16 frames, and that's been increased to roughly 64 frames, and there's 4 separate fire animations.
Let's light 'em up!
Fire is such an integral part of the game that you see so often, so having that increased fluidity and frame rate certainly hope will be an aspect players appreciate.
We also added orientation. So like in the original, whenever you got shot and died, it would just be in one direction. So whatever direction you were facing when you got shot and died, it would just face forward and die. now I actually did them in all 8 directions. Everything's done in the 8 directions of that original. Another one of the things that we improved on the programming side is that the motion itself across the screen is now done through code as well. So in addition to the animation of my sprites being updated, the actual way they move across the screen has a higher resolution, and that's done on the coding end. So it's a combination of the art and the code together that gives a smoother experience for the game. For the Siege equipment, they were actually in many ways similar to the units, same problems finding and everything. They were larger, so I had to do different process to make sure they fit into the array of frames that I use that I hand over to the programmer. But one of the things that's different, which I think people will really like, is because they're big objects, sort of like the Siege Tower, I think it has 32 orientations. It still only moves in 8, but when it rotates, instead of just clunking click, click, click through the 8 directions, that actually smoothly rotates through 32. So one of the things I had to do is then set up a new camera rig to basically animate the 32 frames as opposed to the 8 frames, and but still have it work so that when it clicks into the actual 8 core directions, it then goes back to the original method of doing it and rendering it out. In the original game, the sprites were not anti-aliased. That means that they had the jaggy edges. It also makes them look a little bit thicker. So when I went back and then I found the originals to use as a source reference, and we used bits and pieces and as well, but a lot of it was also recreated, we'd have to kind of puff them out a little bit. We'd have to enlarge them a little bit so that they read with the same weight that the original character did. But now they have nice anti-aliased edges. That means that the edges they're not like the hard pixels. They kind of blend in with the background a little bit more.
One of the big challenges was how the actual environment sprites were originally created. We had some hints from the source files, but ultimately we had to create our own workflow. A good example would be the trees. So we had none of the original trees, which are obviously a major aspect to the game, and quite a lot of art. So they all had to be remade from scratch. The original plugin for the trees was created by a couple from Massachusetts, I believe. We did originally try to contact them to see if we could get a version that would be compatible, but we were unable to.
Take a look at this.
Jesus Christ,
That right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay?
Even when we had a starting point, so a good example would be the towers. We had all the original models, but the way they were modeled originally meant it was very difficult to make changes and upgrades. So they ended up being completely remodeled anyway. So even with a starting point, sometimes they are just completely remade.
The process involved, you have a few different things there. You have the modeling, so that's looking at the actual geometry itself. Then you have the texturing. A lot of the texturing also didn't hold up the way it was done originally. You would also make decisions at a smaller level, like you would, like, for example, make a nose go really big just so that it reads it all as a single pixel at the original level. But now with the higher resolution, you can't do that, so we have to like remodel the faces a little bit, make them look more appropriate for the scale that they're going to be seen at.
One of the original founders of Firefly, Simon, his head is used for a lot of the textures for the characters. So if you unwrap the models, you can see clearly that the side of his head was used. For this project, this is the first time I attempted to do some photogrammetry. If people don't know, that's essentially taking lots of pictures of an object and turn it into a 3D model. So for this one, I attempted to use quite a simple model, which was some bread that my partner had baked, which you'll hopefully see in the victory screens of a medieval banquet feast. The bread tasted amazing as well. I think my favourite upgrades visually would be the towers and the churches and the keeps. I think the stone buildings have certainly been enhanced by higher tessellated models with actual brickwork, especially at the increased resolution of the game.
What I'm really excited about for this project is that the entire game got an upgrade. The graphics, the code, there were added content, the menu system looks even better. I'm just really excited about taking a game that is already considered a great game and well loved and just fixing or upgrading the things that needed to be done, but not making it a different game. So what I'm really excited about really is finishing it so that I can give it to my son so he can play, because he hasn't played the original one, so he can play it in its ultimate definitive state.
When we first released the trailer and the public demo, I was quite apprehensive on how people might receive the changes. But I do believe we have gone a long way in trying to respect the original art and not change it significantly enough, and only make quality changes.
We have a lot of excitement for this game, and I'm excited for everybody else's excitement.